This conference will now be recorded.
Great. And just before, for a little tech check here, Russ, just want to make sure you're good to go. And Ben, you'll share the screen. You'll give Russ controls, right?
Yeah, I'll give Russ and Brian presenter control.
Great. Okay. Well, we still have a bunch of people joining here. I don't have a ton of announcements at the beginning, but I'm really excited to see a lot of folks online because we're going to have a good discussion around 11 after our primary updates that, our monthly updates. One big update at the beginning is that the Drought Task Force group met about a week ago to review conditions in the interim as things have been changing, and there was a desire to have the Water Availability Task Force group, which is all of you, meet and review conditions and have a discussion around activation, the possibility of activating the drought plan, and we can get into that after we hear the latest updates from our experts in the virtual room. So I'm Megan Holcomb because I don't think my video is on right now. It's CWCB. For any of those I have not met, I'm glad you've joined. And then we have Ben running the ship. So Ben, I'm gonna toss it to you to share controls with Russ, and we can just kick it off with the state climatology report.
All right, see if we can make this work right.
Yep. And then a general note, as you're getting set up there, Russ, I will be monitoring early morning, the chat box. So if you have questions that pop up, just thoughts, or for whatever reason you need to jump off, but you wanted to add your 2 cents later for the discussion, please enter that in the chat, and we'll be sure to go through all of those. All right, all you, Russ. Thank you.
Great, sounds good. My slide looks like the title slide looks okay on the screen.
Looks great.
And you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right, well, I'm gonna make this as I learned from shifting to online teaching this spring, the little laser pointer seems to work a little better on the screen here. All right, so we'll just dive right into it here and look at where we're at in terms of the water year so far. I just put this in here. It's this beautiful photo that a storm chaser took in right at the border in southeast Colorado last week with one of the storms. So nice, colorful Colorado sign there. All right, so we'll kind of, as we usually do, go back through the kind of the stats for where we're at so far in the water year, going back to October, starting off at kind of this broad statewide perspective, and then we'll dive down into some of more details. Just going back to April, we're almost done with May now, but we'll go back to see where April ended up. It was near normal in terms of temperature, so that's what's shown here. For the water year so far, we're a little bit above average statewide. October, if you remember way back when, was a very cold month, but then it's been kind of near to above average in terms of temperature since then. Precipitation was running pretty close to average through most of the water year statewide, but then April was very dry, so sixth driest April on record, and we're now pretty a decent bit below average statewide, but as we'll see, there's certain parts of the state where that is even worse scenario than what that suggests. We like to kind of look at some of the daily records. Nothing especially notable here. Most of the records that you see on the cold end here were back from October, so there's a lot of cold records in the list here because of the really cold October, but since then nothing super remarkable as far as those. So we have, for the water year at least, we've got cold records outpacing warm records across the state. Again, mainly from October. Just some other notable events in the meantime, since we've there, got that working again. Since you know, in the last couple of months that are of interest. So as you probably heard, Boulder set their all-time seasonal snowfall record, so 152 inches. I'm pretty sure we're done with snow now for Boulder, but still new seasonal record for that station. There was a pretty significant freeze on the west slope on the April 13th, 14th time frame. So Grand Junction got down to 19 Fahrenheit on April 14th, which was the second coldest temperature they've ever had in the spring after April 10th. This was very damaging to the peach crop. As you may have seen, there was a state disaster declaration related to the peaches, and perhaps others on the call know more details of that. And then the San Luis Valley has been really warm in the last month or so. Alamosa set 13 daily high temperature records, although we're a little suspicious of the details of the instrument there. Looks like it may have had some issues, so we're not totally confident that it was really this many records. But in any case, it's been very warm and dry in the San Luis Valley, and we'll see that as we go forward here. All right. Okay, so diving in to look at the picture across Colorado a little bit further. This is again going back to April. Basically, east of the divide was a bit cooler than average. West of the divide was generally near average to a bit warmer than average, with southern Colorado having some areas that were quite a bit warmer than normal going back to April. But again, it's always good to zoom out and see this picture across the globe, where much of the continental US, again in April, and Canada were fairly cold with respect to average for April, but worldwide was yet another very warm month, second warmest April on record globally, and the January through April period so far has been the second warmest on record globally. And from the NOAA summary, it said the year 2020, based on what we've had so far in the first 4 months, it's almost certain to rank among the 4 warmest years on record. But again, that's kind of a different story from what, at least locally, what we've seen here in North America. So just to kind of wrap up on temperature, this is the water year comparison to average so far, with, again, not a lot of things really sticking out here. The Eastern Plains have been near normal to slightly cooler than average. North Park and South Park had a cold winter, especially a cold fall and a cold winter, so they remain quite a bit cooler than average for the water year so far. West Slope, a bit of a mixed bag, but most places have been a bit warm, and some places in southern Colorado quite a bit warmer than average, but nothing especially remarkable in terms of temperature, at least from the kind of aggregate of October through April. Now shifting gears to precipitation, again, looking back to April, what we saw is we had some significant snowstorms in northern Colorado in April. Seems so long ago to think of that, when we had a foot of snow here in Fort Collins back in mid-April. But then southern Colorado, especially southeastern Colorado, was extremely dry in April, and then also the Four Corners region and the San Luis Valley were very dry in April. So this is as a percentage of normal. You can see a lot of these places in the Arkansas Valley being in that 0 to 20% of average rainfall in April, and similarly very dry in the Four Corners region. All right, and here's looking at that sort of with the historical percentiles. Again, with the exception of the kind of northern Front Range and the northern mountains, most of the state was quite dry in April, and some areas being near to record dry in southwestern Colorado, like in the San Juan Mountains and other parts of the western slope. Here is water year to water year through April precipitation. Again, kind of you see this wet north, or at least near normal north, and dry south pattern that we will see on a lot of these maps. You can see up in the northern mountains, and North Park is well above average for the precipitation wise for the water year through April. But southern Colorado, not so much, where southeastern Colorado has been quite dry, and the San Luis Valley as well. Those are the two places that kind of stick out on this map. And if we look at that also for in terms of those percentiles, similar story. So parts of the San Luis Valley are record dry through April, and that has really continued here through May thus far. And then parts of the Arkansas Valley very dry, and some other parts of the West Slope very dry as well through April. So we're now almost all the way, through May, and so we can have some confidence in what we're seeing for the May statistics so far. This shows departure from normal temperature for May through a couple of days ago. With the exception of the far northeastern corner of the state that's been a little bit cooler than average in May, everywhere else has been quite warm. And it's some of those same spots sticking out, the West Slope, the San Juans, the San Luis Valley being very warm with respect to average for May so far. And then for precipitation, some of those same areas pop out on the map. This is just amount of precipitation for May through Tuesday, I guess. And it's been dry since then. But what you can see is northeastern Colorado has had a good amount of precipitation, several nice storms bringing quite a bit of moisture up there. That's what we expect in May. So it's good that has played out. Areas that kind of show up in the browner colors here, San Luis Valley and parts of the western slope are generally not that wet on average in May, so that part is maybe not quite as concerning. But maybe the more concerning spots, and we'll see this quite a bit, is southeastern Colorado. There was one thunderstorm complex last week that kind of went through like the Rocky Ford area that you can see in those blues in Otero and Crowley County there. So some areas locally got 2 to 3 inches of rain from those storms, but then you don't have to go very far west or east, and it was that they were missed by that almost completely. So those areas having only a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch of rain in May so far is quite a bit below average down there. And so just kind of put that in perspective, we look at this map of May precipitation so far and compare that to what we expect. These maps show basically whether it's typically a dry month or a wet month in May in this example. So what you can see is northeastern Colorado is typically May is one of the wettest months. And fortunately, that's played out this year, but it's still a relatively wet month in southeastern Colorado on average. But that has not played out this year. Southwestern Colorado, May and June are kind of the dry season. That we don't expect much precipitation down there, and we haven't gotten much. So that's just to kind of see where this fits in terms of climatology, and we'll come back and look at this for May and June at the end here. Standardized precipitation index is just another slightly different way to look at that issue of basically how unusual is this year or this time period with respect to the variability that we typically see in that time period. And so here, if you see the kind of greens and blues, there aren't too many of those, but where those are, it's above average precipitation with respect to the normal for that location. and then where you see the yellows and oranges and reds is where it's much drier than average. And so what pops out here, again, similar to most of the other maps, most places, the southern half of the state and then the western slope are showing up dry, and really quite dry for this time of year, especially in some, those darker brownish colors are where it's very dry for this time of year. A few green dots on there. You can see Rocky Ford as that one dark green dot there where they had that storm last week, but that was not, that was pretty localized and didn't hit the surrounding areas very well. So this is for the 30-day period going back to late April. If we go back 3 months to February, what we see now is, again, similar picture. Northeastern Colorado doesn't look too bad, mostly near normal conditions there, and other parts of northern Colorado. But then if you go to the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, the San Luis Valley, some of those dark red and brown colors that we don't like to see on these maps. And then lots of other orange and, from the kind of light orange to dark orange colors, which also represent dry conditions. We go back even farther. This is 9 months now, just to kind of give a longer term zoom out. And so this covers the late summer. It goes all the way back to late summer last year when we had that dry monsoon, really lack of a monsoon at the end of last summer. You can see that, again, much of the west slope, the San Juans, other parts of the southeast plains being very dry going back to the long term. So we have kind of a mix of both this long-term dryness issue going back to last year, but also then these pockets of short-term dryness as well. So some concerning aspects in both of those areas. And when we look at the Drought Monitor map, we'll see a lot of those pick up. I'll go kind of quickly through some of these stations, although I'll focus on a couple of them in more detail. These are the sort of usual suite of stations going around the state, from starting at Grand Lake and kind of going counterclockwise around there. So what we're going to look at on these are where we're at in terms of precipitation so far at these stations for the water year, and then basically, so that's the black line. And then going forward is all the historical years at that station in the light gray lines from this point forward. And then the dashed green line would be if we got average precipitation from this point forward. The purple would be if we were somewhat above average, the orange if we were somewhat below average from this point forward. So Grand Lake, everything's kind of right on track. You can see that they got a bit dry in the early winter in December, January, but then February was a very snowy month. And so they've had periodic precipitation since then. So we're basically just a tiny bit below average there precipitation wise. So that one, nothing too worrisome there. But then as we go across the west slope, this is where we see a lot of these stations being quite dry. So Grand Junction, only 61% of their average precipitation so far for the water year. You can see, barring an extremely wet monsoon, they're going to end up below average for the water year. And if we have a not good monsoon like last year, then certainly this is kind of a worrisome position to be in, because the July and August and September tend to be pretty wet months out in the Grand Junction area, whereas this time of year, May, June, tends to be pretty dry normally anyway. Montrose, similar story, only 59% of the average precipitation for the water year so far. It's been, very dry since December or so there. Again, similarly, we need a quite wet monsoon to get back to near normal there. It's not out of the question. As you go further southwest in Colorado, the monsoon is more important. So we'll wait and see there. But again, quite dry up to this point at Montrose. Mesa Verde National Park, southwestern Colorado, just over half of their normal precipitation for the water year so far, and basically there would not be any historical precedent for them to get back to average precipitation for the year there. So that's how dry it's been there. So even a record wet monsoon, would maybe just barely get them back to average. So pretty concerning down there in Montezuma County. You can see they've had essentially no precipitation since the middle of March or so. Alamosa now, San Luis Valley, very dry. It's a dry place normally, of course, but even so, only half their average precipitation through this point in the water year. The potentially good news again there is that their wet season, most of their rain falls in the mid to late summer. So there's a decent chance if we get a wet spell there that we could get back to average conditions in the San Luis Valley, but things are in pretty rough shape, at least at the moment. Pueblo, similarly dry, only 58% of average for the water year, but similarly, July, August tend to be wet periods in that area, so there's at least some of that kind of hope we can hold out in the longer term, but as we'll see, the shorter term forecasts don't look so great. Walsh, southeastern Colorado, again, less than half of their average precipitation for the water year so far. Their wet season is still to come, but they're not starting off in a good place. And it's been very, very dry in that corner of the state as well since, really since the beginning of the water year there. They just haven't had the periodic storms that you'd normally get. Now shifting a bit farther north, Burlington, they've had some decent precipitation in May, so that's helped a little bit, but still only 58% of the average so far, with at least on average wetter times yet to come, but probably not in the short term. Akron, so again, now kind of shifting a little farther north, then things aren't quite as bad. The May has been a pretty good month on the northeastern plains. They were quite dry coming into May, but May has been, we expect it to be wet, and it's at least come through in that regard. So 79% of average for the water year so far, not as concerning as some of the other nearby areas. And then Boulder, with its record snow year and a decent May so far, sitting at 120% of average. So it's the only one of this set of sites that we regularly look at for WATF that is actually above average for the water year so far there at Boulder. Okay, so let's try to piece this all together now in terms of what this looks like in terms of drought. As this photo here, you may have seen the reports of the fire, pretty large fire in Las Animas County last week. That shows up in the photo here, and kind of the picture of the generally dry conditions that are ongoing down in that area. All right, so here is the hot off the presses Drought Monitor map released this morning. And what you can see is the two spots that kind of jump out on the map are Colorado and sort of our surrounding states here, and then some parts of the Pacific Northwest as having pretty worsening drought conditions. On the other hand, much of the Midwestern United States has been very, very wet, and so no drought concerns there, but of course the flooding concerns are always often the bigger deal there. Zooming in on Colorado, then here's what our map looks like. There were some slight improvements this week in the kind of north of I-70 on the eastern plains. This area was in D2 last week, but saw some decent rains from the storms over the weekend and throughout the last week, and so there's a slightly reduced D2 area here in the eastern plains, but this D3 area in the Arkansas Valley and then the San Luis Valley, and it's starting to extend over into the to the San Juans remains. So we've got 17 30-ish% of the state in D3 extreme drought conditions, and then about 43% of the state in severe drought conditions. You know, and then the places that are doing okay are in the northern tier of counties where the precipitation and the snow over the winter were much better. Just to look at that in terms of the change, this is the change over the last month. So these areas in this darker orange have seen a 2-class degradation in the last month. The yellows are a 1-class degradation. You can see improvements in northeastern Colorado from the nice rains here in May. We go back 3 months, you can see that, you know, much of southern Colorado has worsened in that 3-month period. You know, now where we're seeing those D2 and D3 categories that came about fairly quickly. One other thing, just to kind of maybe tie this to impacts a little bit more, are CoCoRaHs condition monitoring reports. So these are reports that the citizen scientists who take precipitation observations can also enter in terms of kind of a subjective scale of what they're seeing locally. And this is for reports from the last week or so, along with the Drought Monitor. This still has, I think, no, that is the updated Drought Monitor here, I guess. But in any case, just you can kind of see where those actually line up reasonably well, where people are reporting severely dry conditions with what the Drought Monitor categories look like. I'll just highlight one here. We get great narratives in these, so these are useful. Of course, you have to kind of calibrate them with what the observer, you know, how often they report and what, you know, whether they're, you know, just kind of how their you know, the text that they write fits with the other data that's out there, but they're really useful bits of information. So from that one near Lamar there, you know, we've had much more moisture this month than any other month this year, but that isn't saying much. Prairie has not come to life. People have been really talking about the winds and the blowing dust down there in southeastern Colorado as well. So just a you know, one tidbit, and we've been getting quite a few reports along these lines from various folks in southeastern Colorado about the just how dry the landscape is there, and the impacts on the winter wheat, and the blowing dust and the grass fires and so forth in that area. And that lines up reasonably well with what we see. This is a satellite product called VegDry. So it tries to look at what the vegetation conditions look like with respect to the average for that time of year. This is from a couple of days ago, but of course vegetation takes a while to respond to precipitation. So I think maybe the conditions, Joel can chime in on this later, maybe the conditions in northeastern Colorado have improved a bit recently, but you can still see a lot of this sort of red and orange and brown, indicating that the vegetation is not greening up to where we would expect for this time of year in many parts of the state, especially in southern Colorado and parts of the southeastern plains. All right, so where are we going from here? I kept the snow mogul run picture in there in honor of A Basin reopening this week, I guess. But let's take a look at where we're headed here in terms of the outlook. So here's the NOAA 7-day precipitation forecast for Colorado and surrounding areas. What we see is you know, decent chances for precipitation kind of along the Front Range here and into the mountains, and even in parts of the San Juan Mountains and the Sangre de Cristos, with decent chances for precipitation over the next week. What we have going on is what's going to set up is this giant ridge of high pressure over the central United States. So east of the divide, it's going to start getting very, very warm, basically after today for quite a while. But with that big ridge of high pressure, what we get sometimes are storms to kind of roll in on you know, coming up from the southwest, from the Pacific, and it looks like we may get one or two of those over the next week to bring some precipitation to southern Colorado, which would certainly be quite welcome there. Not too common to get that this time of year, but if that pans out, that would be a nice thing there. So just to look at that in terms of some of the forecast models. So this is basically the global ensemble forecast models running out for the next couple of weeks. Each color here is a different model run, and then the black is the mean of those. And then the gray line is the average over that period. So this is precipitation at Lamar, just as a kind of an example site for southeastern Colorado. And what we see is some chances for rain over the next couple of weeks, but not very much. We should get, you know, 1.25 inches to 1.5 inches over southeast Colorado in the next 2 weeks, but the models instead are pointing to more, you know, maybe 1/2 inch at best. And so this is not a great sign there. And sort of exacerbating that is the temperature forecast for eastern Colorado, which looks very warm for the foreseeable future. So again, here's the average high and the average low on the bottom in gray, the average high on the top in gray, and then the forecasts are all, you know, with the low temperatures being a good 10 degrees above average, the high temperatures being, again, a good 10 degrees above average for quite an extended period, after today being the last kind of coolish day in east of the divide. For a bit of a contrast, then we go to Durango in southwestern Colorado. On average, they should only get 0.3 inches in the next 2 weeks or so, but they actually see, you know, reasonable rain chances on a few occasions down there, such that the model average, at least over this time period, you know, take that a bit with a grain of salt. I wouldn't you know, hang my hat on the details of these forecasts for precipitation in the summer, which is always hard to forecast. But in any case, it at least shows that the things should stay more in the near normal to maybe a bit wetter than average down in southwestern Colorado. Average isn't very much this time of year, so it's not going to be that much rain, but at least there's a little bit of short-term relief potential down there. So then looking out then, you know, to the 8 to 14 day outlook from the CPC, this reflects that big ridge of high pressure over the middle of the country with increased chances of above average temperatures for the 8 to 14 day period. Precipitation, again, as always this time of year, not a lot of confidence in the longer range precipitation forecast, but it does suggest drier than average, at least increased odds of drier than average east of the divide, increased odds of above average precipitation near the Four Corners. But again, keep in mind that average is not very much down there in early June. And again, looking back to what we expect for May and June, May is typically a wet month in northeast Colorado, a dry month in southwest Colorado. June, similarly, tends to be a wet month across most of the eastern plains and a dry month in the mountains and the western slope. So that's just kind of always good to keep that in mind, what we're expecting there. That you know, above average precipitation would certainly be great and welcome, but it's unlikely to be huge amounts in early June in the Four Corners. And then we'll kind of end up with looking out to the future. So this is actually now a look back to the past before we look at these for the future, but it's always good to kind of go back and see how the outlooks did. This was what the seasonal outlook looked like for February, March, April. So just kind of seeing what that looked like. It had, you know, above normal chances for warm temperatures in to the south, and then cold up in the Midwest. And for precipitation was sort of increased odds of wet north and dry south. What ended up happening, here's the above, near, or below normal for temperatures, and similarly for precipitation here. What ended up happening, this was not one of their finer seasonal outlooks, at least out here in the West. It ended up being near to cooler than average across most of the West, when the outlook was generally pretty warm, although they got this Arizona, New Mexico spot quite well. And then precipitation ended up being dry throughout much of the northern and western tier of the country for the February, March, April period, when that was a bit of the, and then wet in Arizona, New Mexico, which is a bit of the opposite of what the outlook was showing there. So not one of the finest ones there, but in any case, it's always good to just kind of keep an eye on how these turn out. So with that in mind, we'll kind of look forward here. This is for June. Again, warm in the Southwest. So if we translate this to probabilities for Durango, for example, shows June has a 58% chance of being above normal temperatures, a 33% chance of being near normal, and only 9% chance of being below normal for temperature. So definitely a tilt in the probabilities there towards warm conditions. Precipitation, on the other hand, is basically equal chances across most of the western U.S. for June. So just not a lot of confidence in the precipitation forecast there. And then if we look out to the seasonal outlook, June, July, August, that's very, very high confidence in warmer than average conditions in southwestern Colorado. At Durango, that's 73% chance of being above normal temperature, and only a 3% chance of being below normal. So that's very high confidence for one of these seasonal outlooks. But again, precipitation, it's summer precipitation, the monsoon is very difficult to put a lot of confidence in 3 months out. So a slight tilt towards drier than average conditions in western Colorado, but you can see in the pie chart it's basically it's like a 1% increase. So not really a lot of signal as far as that goes. And then looking out further in the future at El Nino, and so right now we continue to be in neutral conditions in terms of El Nino Southern Oscillation. The most likely scenario is that we continue in neutral conditions through the summer. So that's a 65% chance of continuing neutral through the summer. But as we get into the fall and the winter, so that's the blue bars on here are the probability of La Nina. And you can see those become roughly equal with the neutral category by the time we get to September or so. And what La Nina tends to mean here for our winters is snowier north and less snowy south. So I think we kind of need to hope for a good monsoon in southern Colorado, because if we start tilting towards La Nina as we get into the fall and winter, that's usually not a good sign for southern Colorado if that happens. So we'll need to be hopeful for a good monsoon here in the meantime to set things up better going into next winter. But of course, this is looking out really far into the future as far as these outlooks go. So some summary points. For the water year, going back to October, it was very cold, but then the water year temperatures have been near to slightly above average since then. May so far has been quite warm across the state, with the exception of the northeast corner. We'll hear more about snowpack in a minute, so I won't belabor that here. But things have been very dry across the southern half of the state since April 1st or so, or really since kind of the middle of March. And so that's led to drought intensification, especially in the San Luis Valley, the Arkansas Valley, and a growing part of the Western Slope. The Western Slope is heading into what's one of the drier times of year for the next month or so. Although the shorter term forecast actually gives some potential for decent rain, at least decent for late May, early June. The situation on the Eastern Plains, on the other hand, looks like it's going to get worse before it has a chance to get better. The next couple of weeks look very hot and probably dry across the Eastern Plains. So that's probably the biggest concern spot at the moment, where we've already been hearing a lot of impacts of drought in the Arkansas Valley, and at least in the short term, that's not likely to get any better. But of course, we can always hold out hope for the monsoon, which tends to be a wet time of year both on the Western Slope and in southeastern Colorado. So uncertain on what the outlook actually looks like for this year in terms of precipitation, but the temperature outlook is not favorable with that very high confidence in a warm summer, especially in on the western slope. So that's, oh, and there's my contact and all that. Let's see if I can successfully get out of this. My mouse has been, okay, there we go. So happy to take any questions or comments.
Does anyone have any questions for Russ after this presentation? Thank you for that. It's really helpful.
I saw Greg from the Weather Service on the call. I don't know if you have any different information on the forecast than what I shared there.
Hi, Russ and all. Yep, nope, you did a good job summarizing things. That's pretty much what we've been looking at too. Triste is also on the call, and she may have more to add, but what you said looked good.
I didn't see her in the, hi Triste, I didn't see you in the list there.
All right. Well, thank you for that. And
would we be able to get a copy of that PowerPoint? This is Tom Watkinson from Telluride.
Yeah, for sure. We'll post it here at this, and then I know Ben always puts them on the WATF website also.
Russ, could you
or just
copy
drop me an email works too. I can send it to you.
Russ, can you copy and paste that link from your slide into the chat for folks?
Yeah.
Thanks. Okay. And Ben, I think pass things to Brian.
Yep. Brian, I just shared just made you the presenter.
Awesome. Yes. Hello. Thank you, Ben. I just accepted. Can everybody see my screen now?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Excuse me. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all healthy and as well as can be expected. So yeah, Russ highlighted a lot of what's going on right now and the fact that we've had some dry conditions. It's been an interesting year to a degree that, if you look at the snowpack in many locations, snowpack actually looked pretty good and was pretty good in many cases. But as I kind of look at it, the underlying precipitation and soil moisture conditions that we have were pretty dry. So I'll get into that in each one of the individual basins, and mainly at the end of the presentation when we go over the state. So we'll get started here. In the northeast corner of the state, you can see that snowpack. Can everybody see my mouse? Is it actually showing my mouse over top of the?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Megan. You can see from the dark blue, the heavy blue line, that snowpack in the Yampa White was actually slightly above normal for the 2020 water year. But, we started to see some early melt early on that was a bit on the above normal side for melt rates. And that got snowpack melted earlier than normal. Now you can see that we do still have snowpack in place in the combined Yampa White basins, but I'm not going to focus on that really for any of these basins because snowpack is more than 50% melted at this point. And there's just not a whole lot of bearing based on where snowpack is currently at this point. The snowpack peak is probably a little bit more important at this point. Precipitation through the month of April at all of our snowtell sites in the combined Yampa White Basin was 78% of normal, whereas May to date, and we're almost done with May at this point, has been 62% normal as of yesterday. Here's all of the individual snowtail sites and the precipitation that we've seen as of yesterday morning. Exactly as Russ was pointing out, we're below normal for precip month to date. So here, year to date, precipitation in the combined Yampa White is 94% normal, and we've had a little bit of a drier spell over the last 2 weeks or so. Keep in mind for all of these streamflow forecast map graphics that these forecasts are based on the May 1 date or May 1 observations for both precipitation and snowpack. So these forecasts are a bit dated in that, you know, conditions have changed, I would say significantly since May 1. And forecasts are probably going to change somewhat significantly, I would say statewide for June 1 is what we're hearing and seeing based on the data that we've observed. Okay, moving into the upper Colorado, snowpack peaked out at about 108% of normal. And again, we had some early, or I shouldn't say early, we had some quick melt in May, a little bit above average. And that's why snowpack is now slightly below normal in the upper Colorado basin. April precipitation was 78% of normal, and month to date for May so far is only 50% in the upper Colorado. And here you go, here's all those sites that are going into that month to date precipitation number. You can see that there was only one site that was near normal precipitation. I think that was from some convective storms. Year-to-date precipitation in the upper Colorado is 88% of normal. And then forecast. Oh, sorry, guys. I'm on call, but excuse me. Sorry, guys. Streamflow forecasts are some of the best in the state here in the upper Colorado. We have the highest, or excuse me, not the highest in the state, but Muddy Creek below Wolford Mountain Reservoir is 110% of normal. And then as you go further downstream, streamflow forecasts are not as good, but still a good bit better than the rest of the state. And then here, reservoir storage over the long term is still tracking above the general normal, but well within the range of normal. It's not far above normal here. Okay, moving on into the South Platte, snowpack peaked out at 121% of normal, the best in the state. And then we saw relatively normal snow melt since then. And we can see that we're pretty close to normal. April precipitation was 85% of normal, but May to date has only been 52% in the South Platte. So the South Platte, as Russ pointed out, usually is one of the wetter portions of the state right now, and it's even showing up below normal at this point. Here you can see a number of the sites, all of the sites that go into the month-to-date number. And then here, the year-to-date precipitation for the South Platte is the best in the state at 97% of normal. Streamflow forecasts, again, the best in the state is their Spiny Mountain Reservoir inflow at 111% of normal for the April through July volumetric forecast. And then the rest of the basin is quite close to normal. And then reservoir storage is tracking pretty close to normal across all of the reservoirs combined in the South Platte. Okay, moving on into the Gunnison. This is where things look a little bit worse, just like Russ pointed out. Snowpack peaked at 95% of normal, just slightly below normal, which is good. But you know, when you look back here at snowpack, and I'll also point it out in the precipitation graph, you'll see that we were below normal, and that's what I was talking about. The underlying precipitation, both at the beginning of the year and at the end of the year, specifically in the southern basin, has been a good bit below normal. April precipitation in the Gunnison was 48% of normal, and May to date has been 25. And then you can see that it looks like not a single site that was reporting data has been above 50% of normal accumulation for precipitation through May. Year-to-date precipitation 73% of normal in the Gunnison, and just as Russ pointed out, drying out over the last month and change. Streamflow forecast in the Gunnison below normal, 80% at Tamishi, but unfortunately below to well below average streamflow forecast as of May 1 in the rest of the Gunnison, and the lowest in the state is Surface Creek at Cedar Edge with 37% of normal forecasted runoff. Reservoir storage, fortunately, in the Gunnison at this point is above, well, really, let's just call it right at normal, slightly above normal. But we'll have to see how that pans out going here through the rest of the spring. Okay, moving on down in the southwest corner of the state, again, snowpack very close to, or snowpack peak very close to normal at 97%, but we did see above average melt rates in the southwest corner of the state, in the southwest San Juan, and that's why snowpack is already just about melted out. April precipitation was only 21% of normal in the San Miguel Dolores and San Juan basins, and May to date is only 10% according to the SNOTEL sites. So very low. You can see the stat graph here really coming up short of that normal. So it should be somewhere in here at this point. These last 2 months have been well below normal. I haven't quite looked into why a number of these sites are showing as not reporting data. I don't think we're having a data outage yesterday morning. I'm wondering if a number of these sites are tripping their low input profile, and they're coming up so low that it's not even registering. I would have to verify that. If anybody is interested in me verifying that, please speak up, let me know, or write a message in the comments. Year-to-date precipitation, quite dry over the last 2 months, very little precipitation at all at a number of sites. Again, why I think we had some zeros, some of those white designated points. And then year-to-date precipitation has been 68% of normal. Sorry, guys. The streamflow forecast in the rest of the state streamflow forecasts for the San Miguel Dolores and the San Juan Basin are pretty low, but not quite the lowest in the state, but pretty low. And you can see those here. Reservoir storage this month just dipped below normal for the combined San Miguel Dolores and the San Juan basins, but still generally pretty good, near average. Based on the conditions that we're seeing. Okay, moving on into the Rio Grande. Snowpack, again, peaked out right at normal. We'll call that normal. It was a little bit on the early side, a few weeks early, and then we have the above average snowmelt. And snowpack is entirely melted out. The 2% is probably due to just a few bumps in the data, some data errors. Precipitation through April was 15% of normal, and May to date is 28%. And then here you can see again some of those really low numbers for precipitation accumulation through May. And then year-to-date precipitation is 63% of normal in the upper Rio Grande. Streamflow forecast went down from last month. And Lahara Creek near Copland is not zero. There's no forecast that was produced on May 1. This is the one basin in the state where reservoir storage, excuse me, I need to take back my previous comment about the upper Rio Grande. This is the one of the two basins where combined reservoir storage is below normal. And then moving on east into the Arkansas, snowpack is 78% of normal, peaked out near 98% of normal, and was pretty much on time. for snowpack peak, which is good because that has implications on how quickly the snowpack runs off and when the stream flow peaks. April precipitation was 36% of normal, and May precipitation to date was 36% of normal. And then here's month-to-date precipitation in Arkansas. Year-to-date precipitation was 74% of normal, or is 74% of normal in Arkansas. And then stream flow forecast, better in the northern part of the basin, and then deteriorating in the southern half of the basin. Oh, forgive me, I guess reservoir storage is below normal here too in Arkansas. Okay, statewide. Snowpack is 69% of normal, but I hesitate anybody to use that number because there is so little snowpack at this point in time, and it's probably going to come off relatively quickly. Here you can see statewide snowpack peaked near about normal, both in terms of time and in terms of quantity. April to date precipitation is 61% normal, and then May 41%. And then here's all of the sites. You can see that there's definitely been drier conditions in the southern half of the state, and then the northern half of the state definitely still dry, but slightly more wet than we have been seeing in the southern half of the state. Statewide, year-to-date precipitation is 82% of normal and quite dry over these last month and a half, 2 months. And then here's a map of year-to-date precipitation. Forgive the slight discrepancy in numbers. The graph products and the map products are generated slightly differently. They should be, they are quite close, but can result in slightly different numbers. Here's a statewide map of the streamflow forecasts. You can see that the below normal precipitation in the fall and now in the spring is definitely being represented in the southern half of the state. And I think we'll see a change of those streamflow forecasts in the northern half of the state here in the June 1 forecast. And here's a statewide graphic of reservoir storage. Yes, the three southern basins in Colorado are below normal for combined reservoir storage, but the Rio Grande is the only basin that has arguably well below normal reservoir storage for this time of year. Northern basins are doing much better, near to above normal. And then here's a trace of how reservoir storage has tracked over the last 6 or 7 months in the state for each of the individual basins. And then statewide reservoir storage is slightly above normal, but realistically it's right at normal. And then here's the SWASI product, which is, I think we're all aware, based on streamflow forecasts and reservoir storage for this time of year. And I think there might be antecedent street flow in there. So between Russ and I going over this, I highlighted all this stuff in the summary. I highlighted all the stuff that is here in the summary in the presentation. So I won't go over any of this. One thing I did want to point out, I'm going to take a quick step out of my presentation here and show a new product that an ex-NRCS employee has created, and he calls it the snow to flow product. And basically what it does is it shows snowpack as graphed, just like the snowpack graphs, and then also shows on that same graph stream flow. So forgive me, I should have brought this up earlier. And then I'll be done with my presentation.
Thanks. Does anyone have any questions for Brian while he's on hot seat?
Hey Brian,
And
it was maybe the like fourth to last slide where you had the reservoir storage. It looked like there was a big, it went by quick, so I may have missed it. But the bar chart there, like a pretty big drop in the southwestern basins there, the San Miguel, Dolores, Animas, San Juan, going from above average to quite a bit below in 2 months there. Is that usage? Is it releases? Is it evaporation? Any idea?
I don't know. We'd probably have to consult with the managers down there. I would hate to speculate. The next little thing that I was going to bring up, this snow to flow, might be what's going on. It's kind of why I wanted to point out this snow to flow graphic, but I'm not sure if it's the driver as to why reservoir storage has dropped off in Arkansas and the Rio Grande. The other thing with reservoir storage at this point, and thanks for bringing it up, Russ, is reservoir storage is a percent of average, and average for this time of year, and that can be it can be augmented because of management practices, which can kind of swing and ebb and flow based on what current conditions are. So it can be a little counterintuitive. Say if snowpack is above average, usually managers will let a lot of flow go in anticipation of stream flow to be ramped up. So it'll look like you don't have a good situation with a below normal number. However, they're expecting that reservoirs will fill. In this case, they try to ramp those numbers up, is what I've come to understand. Increase storage in anticipation of low flow. And that's not going on here, but sometimes their management practices I don't always understand the entirety of them. So that's why I say I would hate to comment, but it's always been something that's hard for me to track, and I always like to go straight to the source to get a reason as to why. Sorry, that probably doesn't help at all.
No, it does. I didn't even think of that, like the average changing potentially as a result of those other factors. So thanks.
This is Tracy. Can y'all hear me? Yeah. And since reservoir storage, these are the May 1 numbers, right, Brian?
Yes, that's right.
So, like a lot of things, I guess, in this presentation that might have gone back to May 1, seeing where we are June 1 and how that's changed over May might give us a better sense really of where we are right now.
Yeah, that's very well put, Tracy. I think these June numbers will give us a much better idea of where we're at, and based on the conditions that we've seen so far, probably give us a better idea of where we're going. Yeah, that May 1 number is always a little bit tricky to me in terms of giving me idea of where we're really sitting at. I mean, it's definitely a true number of what the reservoir storage is, but in terms of where we're going and what we can expect for reservoir storage, I don't put as much weight on that as I do the June 1 number. I think that's what you were saying, right, Tracy?
Yeah, and just that a lot may have happened between May 1 and now. So we're closer to June 1 at this point than we are to May 1.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so thanks, Russ and Tracy. And here is that snow to flow product. I'll try and, if you want to write it down, actually, you know what, I'll copy and paste it into the message box. But what this product does, let's say let's go into the Upper Rio Grande, for example. And we'll do Rio Grande at 30 mile. So here you can see the black line is this year's trace for snowpack. And then the green line for snowpack, at least as I'm pointing out here, is what the average is. And then you can see the corresponding runoff or stream flow, basically, is the corresponding color. So average is green for snowpack and for streamflow. And then here this year is the black line for both streamflow and the black dotted line for, or excuse me, black dotted line for streamflow, the black line for snowpack. And you can kind of get an idea of what to expect. And then the cool part about this product is you can click on any one of the years and it will show that year to give you an idea of what streamflow might do. You know, so if you find a comparable year to this year, both in terms of snowpack peak and melt off, you might anticipate that, you know, provided you don't get additional precipitation, that you might see that type of streamflow runoff, just to get an idea. One thing to point out is that for streamflow on this particular product, it is regulated streamflow. It is not unregulated. So whatever's going through that gauge, based on reservoir storage and management above, is what you're seeing here. It's not an unregulated flow. So I just thought I would point that out, and I'll paste that into the comments here in just a second. So back to my presentation. Yeah, that's all that I have. I don't know if there's any more questions.
Brian, this is Cindy Blair with the Department of Agriculture, and I just found it interesting that you called out in the Gunnison Basin Surface Creek as being the especially low stream at 37%. Because last week I was talking to an irrigator who said that right now, or then, his meter was reading 47 CFS, and he said at the same time last year it was 147 CFS. So he was pretty upset by the looming future.
Yeah, I think that one has been one of the lower ones this year. So yeah, it is. It's looking pretty dry. I actually happened to travel over there in February, and it was looking pretty dry at that point. So, I mean, on the Mesa, it looked like there was decent snowpack, but again, you know, that's exactly what I was highlighting, and that's what the data is showing this year, is that snowpack looked great. You know, it looked right on track with where it should be, and it was, but that fall dryness that we saw, and actually, I'll even go back to the snow to flow graph. You can just see that, well, this is not the upper Rio Grande's not the best one to show, but there's been a lot of dry antecedent moisture, and I think that's been, I think I've heard from the forecasters that that's been one of the drivers as to why we have such dry stream flow forecasts. One of the reasons is just the dry conditions that we had this fall are playing a big role in that. Thanks, Cindy. Good hearing from you. Any other questions or comments? All right. Well, thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Brian. So next on the agenda, before just open discussions, we have our regular reports from the water providers. And oh, thanks for pulling that up, Ben. Ben, do you go? I don't know. There's a few callers that don't have a name associated. But let's just go for whoever wants to take the stage first for their reports.
Well, this is Joel Sneakloff with CSU. I'll do the ag part quick here. Going back to Russ, you said on the greenness, the green up part, a lot of that is, I think, due to the April lack of precipitation that we had in the cool season grasses. We're slow to green up, and even though we've had decent moisture in May, they really like that April moisture and green up. So I think that's what we're seeing, and we can see that in the pastures as well. they're starting to react now, but we're actually starting to see some warm seasons really come into play. But May has been a nice month, but the forecast is not looking good. Winter wheat is our crop that we're worried about right now. Talking with people around, the May moisture has been nice, but it's not going to get it very far. And looking at the temperatures now for the next 10 days, most of the wheat is now starting to head and flower, which is behind schedule. I would guess a good week to 10 days. That's not looking good towards pollination and grain fill for most of the winter wheat here. One producer says, typically we look at 60 bushel, and he goes, I'm maybe hoping for 40. And that's kind of a reasonable, I think. We can see in the last few warm days, even though it's been slightly above average, the afternoons you can start to see the winter wheat showing some stress in the dry land. So if we don't get some more moisture to feed off of what we've had, I'm afraid to say I don't think we're looking at a below average wheat yield, even though we're predicting kind of an average from what I've seen. One of the things we are seeing is it's millet planting season, and millet seed is hard to get right now because according to what the producer or the wholesalers are saying, they said there's a lot of failed wheat that is getting planted to millet this year that normally wouldn't be, so seed has become extremely scarce. I know several wholesalers around here said they're completely out. So it's going to be an interesting year on that aspect. No moisture here lately, and they're getting it in the ground. Some of it's going into fairly dry ground, so we may not even see emergence until we get a rain. So with that, that's about it. I mean, it's okay, but it's not great up in the northeast corner. You go further south, and it just gets more, like they were saying, more dismal as you go south.
Yeah, that's helpful. Who would like to pop in next?
Well, hello, this is John Orr.
Hi, John.
City of Thornton. Our storage, actually, as of yesterday, was sitting at 84.4%, and we're filling just fine. The call on the South Platte, which is running up Clear Creek, well, I haven't looked today, but it was 1909. And so that puts our water rights in good shape for diversions. And so we're happy with that. Production for the year is 6.39% above 2019. And that reflects the last few weeks of very hot and dry. And Colorado Climate Center putting us into abnormal dry conditions, darn them. And then let's see, month to date is 31.99% above last year. So that just tells you how hot May has been. We're starting to develop concern because of the lack of precipitation. Because when you're diverting, you're always diverting for the next season in our business. So that's our concern, is the lack of precipitation and the poor soil moisture. But right now we're semi-happy, Swithin.
Hey, I couldn't let it go by. I heard you use the word happy twice in your there, John. That's highly unusual. So this is Swithin with Centennial Water.
Well, I was going to say, Swithin, that it's because I'm so cooped up. It's hard on us extroverts.
You need to get out on the bicycle more, John. So this is Swethan with Centennial. Since I'm on, I'll go ahead and give the update for Highlands Ranch. We are seeing this month, we're seeing summertime-like demands. We are running about 35% above what we normally see for May. That's due mostly, I mean, we've got the dry soils and the warm weather, so making sense. I am seeing that is mostly due to, the increase is mostly due to irrigation use, so outdoor use, not indoor, because we're not seeing, we're really not seeing it come back through the wastewater treatment plant. It's going out. I know there has been some discussion in other forums about everybody's at home and using more water, cooking and washing dishes and all that. But for Highlands Ranch, that it's all been, appears to be outdoor irrigation use. So our storage this month actually is dropped from about 95% of capacity to, we're currently at 84% of capacity. And we are in the midst of our high diversion season, which has been disappointing so far. And I think it's going to get worse from my observations and from presentations in this seminar, or the Zoom meeting we're on here. Unlike Thornton, we're not diverting for next year. With our lack of storage capacity, we're actually diverting for this year. We did start our deep groundwater wells about mid-May, and we're pushing those pretty well because we have been up against, with the summertime demands, we've been up against what our system can produce. So it's even though we had good snowpack, it's looking to be a concerning year for us down here, or starting to look that way. But it's Colorado and the weather can always change. Good to hear you're happy, John.
So then this is Tracy. Can I ask if and when during this season Centennial Water might start talking about imposing any watering restrictions?
Actually, we have permanent water restrictions. They run from May through September. And we have a water budget that every resident or every household is told what they're kind of expected based on their landscape area, what they would use. And as long as they stay within the normal tier of that, they're charged one price. Once they go above that in each billing cycle, they're charged a higher price. We normally have 2 to 3 water monitors that we hire during the summer that are out patrolling the neighborhoods, enforcing things such as no water waste, not water in the streets and sidewalks, not leaving hoses running unattended, only watering or no watering with your sprinklers between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. We are not, with the COVID pandemic this year, we may bring one person on to do that. We do not have our usual crew because of the COVID issue. But pretty much we have water restrictions in all the time, every year. So another one of the aspects is if you're going to put in a new lawn, you have to do it before June 1st or after October 1st because of the extra water that establishing a new lawn takes, especially during the warmer season. So I guess I would say we're already in place. I don't know, and it's too early to say whether or not we'll have to go do anything more stringent than that, which typically our more stringent measure would be to raise the price on the second and third tiers of over water use on our water budgets.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Do we have Aurora Water on the phone?
Yeah, this is Brian Fitzpatrick with Aurora Water. Can you hear me?
Yes, thanks.
Okay. We're in fairly good shape. We are 76% capacity storage wise, which is about 20% higher than average. And yeah, we've seen spikes in demand. But you know, it's if it rains, then people cut back. But so we are seeing probably between 5 and 10% higher demand than we normally would this time of year. But that's to be expected with, as everyone's saying, with soil conditions what they are. Otherwise, we are not contemplating at this time watering restrictions. Besides, our restrictions parallel pretty much what Highlands Ranches are. No watering between 10 and 6, and we don't do a water budget for each customer, but we do have a suggested, you know, watering times, and also we have a tiered rate structure as well. So if people go over, then they are charged more. Other than that, though, I think we're in pretty good shape.
This is Nathan with Denver Water. Currently, our storage is 88% full. Typical for this time of year would be 87% full, so we're right there with normal storage. We do expect to fill all of our reservoirs this year. And our demands, so for May, we've seen a similar pattern that's been mentioned. We are 35% above normal for May. You know, a big part of that we saw irrigation demands start earlier in the season than they typically do. We don't see the demands that we saw until Mother's Day, and we were seeing that the last week of April, first week of May. Overall for the year, we're about 105% of normal demands. And then again, similar to Centennial, we have, we don't call them restrictions, but we have outdoor water use rules that are in effect from May 1st to October 1st. And those consist of no lawn watering between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m., no watering more than 3 days per week, not watering sidewalks, gutters, streets, just not letting water spray into asphalt. Sprinkler systems should be repaired within 10 days, and then don't irrigate when it's raining or during high winds.
Hey guys, this is, oh, sorry.
With Nathan, John Ord mentioned that the call he's dealing with is 1909. That's down at Thornton. That call is for the middle section of the river, I guess. The Cheeseman call is also on. That's 1893. And earlier this month, we were seeing some 1885 calls. So the water rate call regimen is a little more senior than we're normally seeing this time in May. So that usually at years that happens doesn't bode well for future. It all depends on the monsoon, but probably just another indication we're going to not get the surface water yields this year that everybody would expect with the snowpack we had.
Yeah, I agree with, and our west slope supplies are looking much better than east slope. We do have our senior Cheeseman call on, and we're just not seeing the inflow to Cheeseman that we would expect with the corresponding snowpack.
This is Brian. Sorry, I just wanted to say, Nathan, you know, we are regulating flow in the river to benefit the fish. So that's maybe part of it as well.
But yeah, I guess I I should refer, we're specifically looking at Tarryall Creek and yeah, because we've seen the upper South Platte and middle fork of the South Platte seem to be about normal, but around Tarryall Creek and below Spinney there, we haven't seen the inflow from there that we were expecting.
Yeah, no, and it came out a little earlier in Tarryall, and it was a little later in Spinney. Yeah, we're not seeing inflow at Spinney near what we would expect this time of year.
Katie, go
This
ahead.
is Katie Mazarowski, thanks. With Colorado Springs Utilities, I got to jump off here real quick, but just a quick update on our end. Our storage capacity is currently at about 77%, which is still 10% higher than our average. And we are looking at most of our reservoirs are going to fill this season, especially in the upper arc. And, you know, just like Denver Water, we do have what we call our water-wise rules, which are essentially the same. You know, only water 3 days a week, from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., you know, don't water sidewalks, always use a shut-off nozzle when you're washing vehicles, that sort of thing. But our demands are definitely increasing. They're probably at about 10 to 15% above average for this time of year, I would say. But other than that, everything is pretty much normal.
Thanks, Katie. Sweet. Karen, do you have a report from Telluride? Or anyone else on the line? I think that might be.
This is Isabel at Broomfield.
Hi.
We are very similar to other folks. We've seen demands go up since, I think it was maybe the third week of May, where it got really hot suddenly. People are definitely irrigating more. I think as far as our supplies, we're in good shape now. And we'll see, you know, it sounds like the summer may dry out a bit. So we'll keep a close eye on demands and, you know, if we need to put any extra rules and regs in place for watering. But right now it's kind of business as usual, since for us it's still kind of early in the season. So yeah, not much different than what other folks have said.
Thanks. Okay. Anyone else we've missed on the water provider updates?
Yeah, hi, this is Chris Wolf up here in Eagle River Water and Sanitation District, Vail. Just give you a quick rundown. We're doing good on supply. We're kind of up in pretty high elevation, all things considered, especially when we're talking about front range providers and communities. It seems to be that our peak flow might have happened along the Eagle and the Gore. And it's been kind of an interesting early spring, so to speak, because obviously with COVID being what it is, Vail shutting down means that a lot of the tourism and a lot of second homeowners, the demographics out here, have kind of tweaked some of the water use. So we are actually, as of a couple weeks back, producing less water because there's not as much of a need. And our inflows to our wastewater treatment plants have actually gone down as well. It's kind of a neat little study that we're probably going to be doing this fall, just see how this has affected our systems. But for the most part, everything seems to be going okay. We are starting to have conversations about certain restrictions, and we are definitely going to be pushing forward a more robust program geared towards essentially water efficiency. We're rolling out a couple of programs that are brand new up here, and we're going to really be pushing people to water wisely, even more than we have in the past. So quick rundown of what's going on up here in the mountains.
This is Emily from Water. To give you a quick update.
Is it choppy for anyone else?
Sorry,
yeah, it's choppy for me.
Sorry, my connection's not good. I'm trying to phone, but it didn't unmute me. Can you hear me at all?
Really not much better.
Yeah, it's still really, really chilly.
Okay, never mind.
Is it possible to put the comments in the chat box for us?
Yeah, if you type out a little report, we can review there. Thanks. Okay, anyone else? So we're pretty on schedule here. I'm just running through the names here to see if there's anyone else with a report. Okay. So at this point in the agenda, you know, we've heard a lot of updates. We had planned an extra half hour here to be able to have some open discussion on the possibility and, you know, just looking at the potential of the summer, you know, how people feel about drought plan activation. There are many folks on the line who have gone through, you know, a plan activation before, so we're familiar. I have, you know, some resources if you're not familiar with how that works, that we can talk about offline, or I can send some materials. But really, what I'd like to just kick off is that 1 week ago, we organized a call with the Drought Task Force, which is a lot of director level representation, several of which we have on the line. So thank you for those who are able to join the call, and wanted to hear there's some time for just sharing, you know, concerns on, you know, we've seen some outlooks, and a lot of the conditions in some of these regions are like always, you know, pending on a hopeful, you know, some hopeful storms. And we had a big conversation in the Drought Task Force meeting about the overlap of, you know, COVID response and recovery. We talked a lot about the fire outlooks, which we have a report on the task force website, which I shared a link in the chat of that fire report. And there's just some concerns around fire season, and also, you know, with COVID on top of a fire response season, being concerned about number of volunteers and response. So there's just heightened, as anyone would expect, heightened concerns baseline, and with drought forecasts as they look right now in the direction things look to be headed, just want to have the open dialogue here for people to express, you know, concerns. In the Front Range, you know, is in a different situation than the Southwest and the East and the Southeast, and so I think we've got several folks here from other regions, and just would love to hear anyone who'd like to share some reports, or how your agencies, if you're from, you know, any particular state agency, are thinking about conditions at the moment.
Yeah, hello, this is Frank Kugel from the Southwestern Water Conservation District. Conditions here in southwestern Colorado, as Russ pointed out, and Brian, are extremely dry. The McPhee Reservoir, for example, is only going to be able to provide about 75% of their allocations. They were in line as of February, and even in early March, were likely to fill the reservoir. And as a result of a brutally dry April in the Dolores River Basin, they were unable to meet their allocations. Inflows into McPhee Reservoir for April were 16% of average. So that really was a surprise to them, and really deviated severely from the forecast. The dry conditions are not only in the Dolores Basin, but over in the San Juan at Pagosa, inflows, or the stream flows there, are in the 10th percentile. That's a typical. Dolores is at the 9th percentile. So we're looking at supplies. Dolores Water Conservancy District water out of McPhee, they will likely have to turn off a month early to their irrigators. So that's going to be a significant impact to agriculture in southwestern Colorado.
Thanks, Frank, for sharing that. Also make a note that Emily posted her report into the chat if folks would like to read.
This is Cindy Lair from the Department of Agriculture, and the producers I've talked to in the southern part of the state are all suffering. And as I look at southeastern Colorado and I've talked to some of the ranchers that have had their rangeland burn in the last week and the 2 fires that were down there, it's pretty scary for them. I'm so, as I looked at the maps and looking at most recently what the recent rains have done for Baca and Animas County, that gives me some relief. It just seems like the real hot spot exists over there in Prowers County and really closer to the Arkansas River as you get to the Kansas state line. And so I guess maybe it's a false sense of hope that I have, or optimism, but I think, gosh, well, a lot of that area is pretty well irrigated. Not that they have a guarantee of water, but I'm thinking fire danger and worrying about the fire dangers and property damage, and especially when they're already suffering economically, the ag industry. So anyway, my comment is just, I missed the call last week on the drought task force, but whatever we can do ahead of time to be ready to provide aid, I think is a good thing. Sorry, that's my parrot in the background.
This is Joel Stickloff. We're talking about activating the CSU drought team because of the conditions. And here's a couple of my thoughts and observations. Even though northeastern Colorado is kind of the good spot, we're not really that great. Going in and doing some soil cores and all that into winter wheat stubble early or late April, to early May. Generally, we should have at least 4 feet of subsoil moisture. We were half that this year at that point in time. And I think it's even going to be worse the further down south you go, because anything after wheat stubble was, you're looking at July, August, September rains actually help as well. The winter moisture, we didn't have the winter moisture, and we were exceptionally dry during that July, August, September time period. So we really didn't get the recharge. And that's what the summer crops will rely on later on. And you look at the NASS reports, which I'm still somewhat skeptical of. We're adequate. Typically, we're at 76%, say adequate subsoil moisture. We're at 38%. The short to very short is 4 times higher, or almost 5 times higher than typical. So, and the summer crops rely on that subsoil moisture to make any progress. It's in the dry land, and same with the range. We have to build some subsoil moisture up in the range. So we're living, hand to mouth right now on precipitation. And I think that's going to extend to all the way into the summer, because we just don't have that reservoirs to rely on in the dry land. The second one is looking at what Brian was showing. Stream flows are going to be very short in many areas in the southern part of the state. Reservoir storage is average, below average. There's going to be extreme call on reservoir storage for irrigated ag. We could have, 2018, we saw reservoirs drop like a rock, and we may see that again this year. So those are my concerns on that aspect. Storage is okay, and we're going to be relying primarily on irrigation out of those reservoirs from about this point in time on.
Joe, I'll just add, this is Trace, I'll just add to that, reservoirs and then likely wells with those who have access to wells, which, you know, especially in places like the Rio Grande Basin where they have a need to attain a sustainable groundwater level, that's going to have a long-term effect that irrigators will be able to, in large part, get through this season and finish their crop, but relying on the groundwater, especially in the Rio Grande Basin, just has long-term effects on the basin as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I would assume they're gonna see declines again this year, which have to be made up in the next few years to try to attain that sustainability. Southeast Colorado, you know, they have wells, but that's an aquifer system has declined dramatically over the years, and capacities aren't there like they used to be. So they're kind of more of a limited water situation. And if we stay a dry summer, which typically means we're going to be warmer, a little warmer than average, a little bit higher ET rates, so they're going to be in that much more trouble as well. And they're going to be drawing hard on that aquifer system more than usual. So I just, you know, just right now, I'm trying to align the stars. Unless something breaks and we have a good monsoon, I just do not see a very good agricultural year for a lot of areas, especially in the southern part, especially southeastern. Depending upon how reservoir storage holds out in certain basins, like in the southwest, that could be extremely critical.
Could you just briefly speak to what activating the CSU drought team entails?
We start bringing in details about what you can do for management. We are also the ones that have to write preventive planting letters, abandonment letters, or excuse me, irrigation diversion letters for irrigators, so we get everybody ready for that. We generally try to do some educational for livestock component, the range. With COVID, we've had some discussion about how to try to do that rather than in person. Because we suspect we're not going to be doing any in person until probably at least August, large meetings or larger meetings. So those are the things we work with and try to get information out to producers during this time period. We activate our website as well, which kind of stays hidden for most times unless we're activated.
Okay. Tracy, do you have any reports from DWI that you want to share of just current thoughts?
So I haven't gotten any new updates since we last talked about it, which was, I think, like May 13th. So, but I could just briefly say that at that time I spoke to the division engineers in the Arkansas, Rio Grande, and the Southwest basins. And at that time, they were recommending a wait and see approach. They felt like reservoir storage, although we saw from the data reservoir storage is less than normal in the Rio Grande at present, but they felt that a lot of the larger ditches would be able to rely on reservoir storage. In the Rio, a lot of irrigators would rely on wells. And I guess I'll just paraphrase them to say that this seemed like a dry year, but they're used to dry years. It didn't seem like a dry year that gave them a sense of urgency at this moment, and they were interested in waiting to see, you know, what the following month into June would bring and how things were looking. So it does seem to me that potentially we need to look beyond irrigated ag, which is what the division engineers have insight into, irrigated ag and municipal supplies, and think more about impacts on range and dryland farming and drought impacts outside of those, you know, related to surface water supplies potentially.
Okay, that's helpful.
And Tracy, this is Craig Cotton, I'm the division engineer in the Rio Grande Basin. And just to add to what Tracy said, yeah, we had talked, I think last week or 10 days ago, something like that, and kind of the wait and see approach. Unfortunately, it's just getting worse and worse, it looks like, down here. So we're pretty much done with all of our runoff, and our rivers and streams are heading down fast. We had probably about 3/4 of our ditch priorities that were in priority at some point this year, and that's like I said, we're going to go less and less, and so we're less than half of our priorities on both the Caneas and the Rio Grande are in priority now, and that'll drop significantly in the next few weeks. Our aquifers we're concerned about those too, because they're recharged by the surface streams, and so we get less recharge. And then on top of that, the farmers don't have their surface water irrigation supplies. And so for those farms that are conjunctively using surface and groundwater, they rely more and more on their groundwater supplies, which depletes the aquifers also. So kind of we are looking at a fairly bad situation right now, and it's just, we were hopeful that we'd get some good news, and it just doesn't look like there's much good news coming.
Okay, thanks, Craig. So I did add, let's see, we have something in the chat here. I did add a link to the CWCB's drought page, which has the drought plan, and I alluded to the Annex A really describes the response, but in summary, the Water Availability Task Force role is, this monthly continually monitoring. So this is the group that is always activated in the plan, but it is up to this group to make some recommendations to, the governor that the Drought Task Force reviews to when conditions warrant, and that activation can be done by county, it can be done by sector, with the Agricultural Impact Task Force, being probably the earliest and most appropriate sector at the moment. So what, I guess it would have been nice to have some sort of poll here, but I mean, it sounds like things are, going in the non-favorable directions. And, Tracy, we can talk offline too, based on everyone's comments here. But if we were to draft recommendations, I would ask, and I would send those around to folks on this call to review. And I have been taking fairly extensive notes to get some just examples from different parts of the state and different sectors. But I guess Ben or Tracy, I would love to hear your thoughts on just procedure and next step of how we, might draft some language to at least, have recommendations ready that the group can review.
Hi, Megan, this is Trace. One thing I'm thinking about is wanting to see the data for June 1. So that would be the June 1 streamflow forecast, which Brian indicated and would be lower, and the SWASI, which would consider streamflow and reservoir storage, that would have the most up-to-date information. And then, but in order to do the SWASI, we'd be talking about, we probably wouldn't have that until the end of next week, I think, at the earliest. But I think you're right. I think we're looking at a pretty likely activation across parts of southern Colorado. I didn't hear a lot of concern from municipal water providers in the Front Range, especially those with some storage. So I would think it would make sense to look at some type of activation across southern Colorado. If I had a better understanding of range conditions, dryland farming impacts, Joel gave us some really good information, and Cindy as well. Really appreciate that. I guess I feel somewhat that's outside of my purview, and maybe we can rely on members of the Drought Task Force who also have expertise in that area to understand what regions of the state, outside of what we can see on the Drought Monitor map, we'd want to consider for those types of impacts. So that's my thought, is to wait for some of that data that relies on June 1st information. But that I think it's probably appropriate now for us to make a recommendation, at least for southern Colorado, and definitely would like to hear more from members of the group, though.
This is Russ. I don't have them with me, but Becky's been compiling a lot of the impact reports we've been getting from Southeast Colorado, and they've been pretty bad for quite a long time. I mean, again, mainly in that area, in the D3 area there, in the eastern part of the Arkansas Valley. But we can we can compile that and send it along.
That would be helpful. Do you guys just keep those? You just log those as you get them in? Any kind of reports just internally? Yeah,
it's mostly when from our webinar the other day, we have especially FSA representatives in the Arkansas Valley that regularly call into that and give us feedback. So I wasn't the one taking notes during that one, so I don't have them in front of me, but I can pass that along.
Okay, thanks. Brian, when are the next reports like that you accumulate for the storage conditions across the state?
The official publication should be on Friday of next week or Monday, the following Monday. And then I'm not sure exactly when the SWASIs can be produced after that, if Tracy and crew can produce those in advance of the publication of the report or not. But the water supply outlook report will be available on next Friday. Let me get my calendar out just so I'm clear.
5th.
Yeah, Friday the 5th, or potentially if forecasts are a little bit behind schedule, it could come out on Monday the 8th.
Okay.
And that will include both the reservoir storage and streamflow forecasts.
Okay, well, I think it makes sense, between SWASI, those reports, and pulling some numbers together to, begin at least compiling some language and, pulling in the data as those come in over the next week and a half to support different counties. I do have a document created that's by county to monitor the U.S., basically tracking for the U.S. Drought Monitor of when the first week of D2, first week of D3, et cetera, was seen to really give a visual of, what areas are deepening based on county for folks. And so I can always share those resources. It's more just tracking for my sake. But would anyone, one thing that we can do is draft these materials and just do that through a Google document and have folks all just get their eyes on those recommendations and really flag any concerns of missing counties or regions that we would identify with more data over the next 2 weeks to recommend for activation. And then if we get a good number of folks with eyes on that document, then we would obviously share that then with the Drought Task Force and have a discussion at that. That generally seems like an okay plan.
Yeah,
so
Megan, that sounds good.
Yeah, it sounds like the timing for something like that might be the week of June 8th because we'd have all the information by then.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's.
This is Joel. I mean, the activation plus or minus a week, you know, isn't really going to change much. But I do have a question for Russ, if he's still on. Get your crystal ball out. How much more does it have? How much worse does it have to get before we think we're going to start seeing D4 within those areas?
Yeah, that's a good question. My thought is probably the San Luis Valley would be the first place where that might start to come in, because I mean, again, of course, it's a dry place, but it's with the snow going early and the stream flows being way down and all of that. And I mean, assuming they don't get some decent precip from upcoming storms and it stays warm, that would probably be the first place. But you know, those kind of particular spots in the lower Arkansas Valley would be another spot. I can't imagine it would come within the next week or two, but if we have 2 weeks of, 95-degree days and low humidity and windy and no rain, I mean, it gets bad pretty quick.
Russ, that one graphic that you showed with a 7-day precip, and it looked like there was about an inch or slightly more of precip forecasted for the mountains. Is that precip supposed to fall in the next few days out of that 7-day period?
Yeah, I think it'll be fairly, I didn't actually look super carefully at that, but I think it'll be spread out over kind of over that period. So, it's probably going to be more your regular afternoon showers, but probably wider coverage than you normally have, in that area this time of year. Now, it doesn't look like there's like one big storm coming in that's going to, dump an inch everywhere in a day or something like that. It kind of just looks like increased coverage of the regular afternoon showers. And so probably more likely that just with more moisture there, more likely that more places will get hit, and that, and that where it does rain, it'll rain a little harder than you might normally expect this kind of year. But yeah, it doesn't look like there's not like a remnant tropical storm coming in or something that's going to dump a big amount in a single day, if that makes sense. But yeah, kind of just flipping through it just looks like, kind of every day for the next week down there, there's going to be decent chance of showers and that kind of thing.
Yeah, thanks. That is what I was getting at. And, with the mindset of, waiting a week or a little bit more to make a designation, I was wondering if there was an indicator one way or another that it looked like it was going to come in one big slug. If we did not get that slug, or we got a slug bigger than if it had been a slug that they were predicting or you were predicting, but it doesn't seem like that's the case. It doesn't seem like it's really going to wind up changing the trajectory that we're on very much. It just doesn't seem likely that we're going to be changing the trajectory. And in which case, would we want to change any of the verbiage that Megan's going to draft up or everybody's going to draft up for the activation of the drought plan? So yeah, based on what the conditions that we have, that we've talked about, and what you've been showing for predictions, Russ, it sounds like taking the actions that we've talked about sound right on course, waiting till the end of next week and our reports that come out to finalize our recommendation.
Okay, well, we are surprisingly right on time, and I want to give just any final minutes to anyone who hasn't had a chance to add 2 cents, or anyone who has final thoughts, because we are at the 11:30 mark.
This is Swith, and I just wanted to tell Ben, hey, looks like the technology all went really smooth this time. We didn't have any problems. Kudos to Ben. Good job again.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, well, Ben, you can stop recording this, and thanks everyone. We'll get these